Welcome to Infra&Dev show. I am Mamoudou Bokoum, your host in this podcast dedicated to the challenges and opportunities of infrastructure development in Africa. Today, we continue our discussion with Liz on the challenges of decarbonizing transportation in Africa. This is the second and last part of the interview. In this 19th episode, Liz addresses the following key questions. What trends are we currently seeing in Africa for transport decarbonization? What solutions could we consider for financing transport decarbonization in Africa? What innovative business models are we seeing currently in Africa to help attract funding for transport decarbonization? Our guest, Elisabeth Drake, who we kindly call Liz, is a principal consultant at CPCS and she leads our climate change desk. An economist by training, she has more than 18 years of management consulting experience in the transport and infrastructure sectors in both emerging and developed economies. She has been with CPCS since 2007, except for 2 years with the Federal Ministry of Transport in Canada. She has managed multiple assignments related to transport decarbonization, including assessment of policy and funding options for transition to electric vehicles. Maybe just pushing it a bit, I know you have been involved in most of the projects that CPCS have done regarding decarbonizing transport. What trends are you seeing currently in Africa for transport decarbonization? Any project that really stand out?
I mean, there's lots of great opportunities in Africa for and again, speak of Africa, it's not a country, it's a continent with many different countries and many different markets, but emissions per capita are already lowest in the world in Africa. Now they also have the lowest personal vehicle ownership rates in the world. This means with the sort of right investments in public transport and mobility and urban planning, there's a lot of opportunities to sort of avoid the trap that many countries in the West have fallen into. I live in Canada. It's the same in the U.S. We're addicted to our vehicles. Almost all of our cities and our highway network have been built out such that everybody relies on owning a car. And that's a privilege. I'm not discounting it. It's all been part of our sort of economic growth, but regrettably, we're sort of stuck with what we've got now, and it's very difficult to get people out of their cars and using alternative modes. Radical shift in behavior is needed to change how we move around. In contrast, Africa has opportunities to avoid these sort of pitfalls because personal vehicle ownership is still very low. There's opportunities to improve public transportation, so people are not encouraged to buy cars. Shared taxis, motorcycles, buses, and sort of electrifying many of the main ways to get around are possible now. I alluded to it earlier, that the 2 to 3 wheeler space or the motorcycle space is a huge potential in many African countries. It's a very common mode of transportation. And there's far many more of these vehicles on the road in Africa than anywhere else. Certainly in Canada. I couldn't speak to every other country in the world, but and these 2 to 3 wheelers, these motorcycles are much, I'd say, the economics from the perspective of users, drivers are much better than buying a car or a bus, for example. Like the upfront cost is smaller simply because it's a smaller vehicle. And these battery-operated 2 to 3 wheelers or motorcycles, you can also decouple or sort of split the battery cost from the chassis of the motorcycle, which can further reduce the cost. So it means the upfront purchase cost can be, within reach for more people, which is, great news. And there's other benefits with that model in that you don't need a significant amount of electricity to charge up a battery for a motorcycle compared to, say, a car or a bus, for example.
Thank you, Liz. And you touched a point earlier regarding this challenge in terms of funding or financing these different needs. And Canada definitely is a rich country that can allow to do some kind of investment. And if I bring it to Africa, currently it is estimated that Africa needs $3 trillion to transition to green energy. So it's a huge need to go where we want to be in terms of transitioning to green economy. What solutions could we consider for financing transport decarbonization in Africa? What are you seeing there in terms of solutions really?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of money. The demand for money is enormous. There's also a lot of money sort of, I'd say, chasing green projects in Africa. There's a lot of international donors and climate funds and investment funds and green investors that are very keen to find these green projects. The challenge is that a lot of the sort of foreign investment and donor money that's been invested in Africa has traditionally been for large infrastructure projects, building roads, port terminals, airports, energy infrastructure. And what we're starting to see, as we've been talking about, is for decarbonization, the main impact that you can have is by changing your vehicles, and in particular, changing your road vehicles to different forms of power. So, and that involves dealing with, not quite individual level, but it does come down to individual uptake or companies' uptake of those vehicles. And of course, it involves significant investments in the charging infrastructure itself. So, what we're seeing is, there's lots of opportunities to support startups, like smaller companies that are working in electric mobility in Africa. They're showing a lot of innovation in terms of different business models, particularly in that 2 to 3 wheeler space. For example, companies that are leasing electric motorbikes out to, say, delivery companies. Or solar. I mentioned the ability to use batteries that can be separated from your motorcycle, and you have companies that are setting up sort of battery swap stations. So a driver can be, on their route when their battery runs down, they stop at one of these battery swap stations, just literally take the battery off their bike, hand it in, and grab a fresh battery. So it takes, there's no time. It's a quick turnover. And that, again, is providing another business model, sort of another economic opportunity for the company that is charging those batteries, and storing those batteries. And again, that can be done in a clean way, like using, recharging those batteries with solar energy. So, there's still a large disconnect between, large sophisticated donors and investment funds who want to support electric mobility in Africa but they're still looking or used to that big size ticket, that big project. And I think many of the opportunities are in sort of smaller companies still at this stage, where we're talking about individual assets or the fleets themselves. And so there's opportunities to bridge that gap. In some cases, it could be done by grouping needs into programs. So, for example, rather than an investor engaging directly with an individual sort of bus operator or taxi company or motorcycle owners, which is, it doesn't make sense for many reasons, but they could support a funding program through a regional bank that provides cheap loans for businesses or individuals that want to buy an electric vehicle or an electric motorbike. That's an example of some of the opportunities and challenges that we're seeing in financing. We also need to find a way to kind of present or sell the benefits of electric vehicles to vehicle owners. The upfront cost is still higher, but if people can understand or maybe begin to think of that longer term mindset with sort of lower operating costs and maintenance costs, that can really help. Even in markets where EVs, electric vehicles, are more prominent, there's still, reticence from transit agencies, for example, like to invest in electric buses. They want to understand the economics, like how will the electric bus work in different weather conditions? What will extreme heat, or in Canada's case, extreme cold, what does that mean for the battery? How far can the bus travel before it needs to recharge? How long will it take to charge? What does this mean for the drivers? What does it mean for your bus route, the routes that your buses take? And, is there enough capable technicians, electricians to maintain your vehicles and things like that?
So thank you, Liz. I hear you well. Educating people on total cost of ownership is maybe one way to go to help people see the benefits of having maybe an EV, and beyond that, having maybe innovative business models could help as well to really get more funding on transport sector for decarbonization. I mean, we could go on and on, I think, and we wanted this to be high level for introducing this topic. We can have really one episode talking about policy and regulation, but let's stop here for now. And yeah, we will definitely continue this discussion. But maybe before we close this episode, could you provide a final word?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the final word would be a segue to what you just mentioned about policy and regulation and really how important that enabling environment is. It's complicated. If we focus on just the road vehicles, the cars and motorcycles, there's a lot that needs to change. The system we've had in place has been around for 100 years, and to move to a completely new system requires new changes in terms of, safety regulations for electric vehicles. What are your charging standards going to be? How much electricity will kind of flow through the system to your vehicle? Standardization of the sort of ports, literally the plugs that you use to charge up your vehicle. And so it's very easy on one hand to be like, well, just buy an electric car, get a bus. But it's quite technically complex, and that a lot of that complexity needs to be addressed through sort of policies and regulations and standards that are in the domain of the public sector, in the domain of government. So there's a lot of support that's going to be required on that side. And I mentioned it earlier in terms of the cost, the upfront cost, and really that enabling environment. A lot has to be done to incentivize a shift to electric vehicles. Norway, for example, has the highest number of electric vehicles per capita in the world by far. But that didn't just come around sort of naturally through the invisible hand of the market. The government set mandatory electric vehicle sales targets for all new vehicles. They have tax exemptions for electric vehicles. They have subsidies to individuals and business if they buy electric vehicles, lower registration fees, exemptions from toll road fees and parking fees. So there's a lot of incentives to help you be able to afford a vehicle. And they even have disincentives like higher parking fees for traditional vehicles and sort of higher taxes and registration fees. So there's a lot of support that is needed, both in terms of the sort of regulatory framework for electric vehicles of all types, and also setting those incentives in place for that transition to happen, to get that mindset shift, and frankly the financial support in place for sort of individuals and businesses that and government authorities too that want to buy into electric vehicles.
Thank you, Liz. Overall, if I was to summarize what you have said, is if you want really to succeed in this transition, we need to set an enabling environment. And I think this need even to have a dedicated episode where we dig deeper in what we can do to have really a good environment where we can succeed in our goals. Thank you very much. This was really a great pleasure to have you on this show.
It's my pleasure, Mamadou. I'm happy to come on any other time. If I could add one other element to that final question, we've talked a lot about electric vehicles, which really, like I mentioned, fall into that sort of avoid shift, improve framework. But, I've probably not emphasized enough the opportunities for reducing emissions from the sort of avoid and shift strategies. We didn't talk about those, but there's evidence that those types of strategies could reduce emissions, anywhere from 40 to 60%. So important to push on the sort of electric vehicles, but equally important, certainly on a global context, to sort of do more with what we have, move people and goods more efficiently, and change the modes from the sort of more polluting modes to the less polluting modes. So I just want to flag those as opportunities. It's not just about new vehicles, as it were.
I see. Improvement can be a good way to go, not necessarily having new assets. So thank you very much, Liz. This is really good to hear from you, and I think we will have you back on this show.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mamadou.
Thank you.
Le développement de l'Afrique passera inévitablement par le développement d'infrastructures qui favorisent une croissance économique durable et inclusive, une économie du bien-être. Ceci fait du développement des infrastructures une affaire pour tous, une affaire de tous. Merci beaucoup d'avoir écouté cet épisode du podcast Infrastructure et Développement. Ceci est un cadre d'échange pour vous. Partagez-le autour de vous et n'hésitez pas à nous laisser des commentaires pour nous faire part de votre appréciation et de vos suggestions d'amélioration. À très bientôt pour un autre